By my count, there are 4 members of the Minnesota Vikings staff that could be headed to greener pastures this offseason, and maybe a 5th if you believe everything you read on the internet. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Today on the show, let's examine the coaching carousel. One of the things we're going to be tracking over the next month or so as these coaching vacancies all get filled, from the head coaching vacancies to everybody filling out their staffs as well, is what kind of poaching happens with the Minnesota Vikings staff. The Vikings have one of the hottest staffs in the league. There are 4 different members of their staff that have gotten interest, and a member of their front office that's gotten interest. I'll say interest vaguely because I don't know what's real or not, but other teams want a piece. And as critical as I've been of Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores in the way that they approached that playoff game, and I don't take that back by any stretch of the imagination, they did a bad job there, and I don't even think they would disagree with me. But in terms of the entire year, in terms of their future in Minnesota, everyone's pretty happy with those guys, including people who don't get to have those guys, but maybe want to have those guys. Usually means you're doing pretty good as a staff when everybody else starts sniffing around trying to get a piece of what you got going here, right? So today I want to take stock in explicit detail of who has been asking around, who is asking for whom, and maybe speculate a little bit on the odds of things happening, but mostly, look, we're going to be talking about this kind of off and on for the next few weeks. So I want to sort of lay the groundwork and have like a reference piece that you can come back to. Or at least that can get you oriented so you know what Google Alerts to set up on your phone if you really want to be that kind of person. So let's start with the big name, Brian Flores. Brian Flores has been requested for interviews by 3 different teams: the Jets, the Jaguars, and the Bears. The Raiders might get in on that too. We'll see. But for now, let's stick to the ones that have actually requested interviews with him. The Bears have one scheduled. The Jets and Jags will probably schedule it shortly. And here is Brian Flores' competition. I think all of these situations are different, and their likelihood of taking Brian Flores is just different team to team. The 3 teams here are casting incredibly wide nets. Jacksonville has requested 10 different interviews, including Brian Flores. That is the least by a good margin. The Jets and Bears have each requested 17 and 18 interviews respectively. So right off the bat, before we can get into the actual names, all 3 of these teams are, like, if you think about, if everyone were like equally likely to get hired, right? I mean, you'd be feeling pretty good about rolling, 1 in 10, 1 in 17, 1 in 18 on all of these guys. That's obviously not the way that it's going. But there are, I think, some hotter names and some less hot names around here, right? A couple of them, by the way, the numbers for interview requests does not include Mike Vrabel, who's already off the market. I'm talking about like guys that are functionally competition for Brian Flores for these roles. For what it's worth, Brian Flores has been asked about this, and he said, I'm flattered. I'm interested in the job. I want the job. I'm going to be I'm going to take this opportunity seriously, right? So if he gets offered a head coaching job for any of these 3 teams, I anticipate that he's taking it. I would not think that there's any like hometown, I just want to stay in Minnesota stuff, or, fear of the dysfunction of Woody Johnson or anything like that. Although, I don't know. If I were in his corner, I would maybe tell him that there should be that with these 3 organizations, which have shown quite a bit of dysfunction. Brian Flores is only going to get one more shot at being a head coach. You're not going to get a third one. Although I say that, and Ron Rivera is on a couple of these lists, so maybe. But I don't think Brian Flores will get a third opportunity unless he really, really has a lot of success with one of these teams. And when you're stepping into a dysfunctional organization like the Jacksonville Jaguars or the New York Jets or the Bears. I mean, let's not mince. I'm not even saying that because they're a rival. I mean, it's like, let's not mince words. And I think Lauren Cox over at Locked On Bears has spicier things to say about that than I do. But if you're going to get into one of these organizations, like, I don't know, like I want, if he's going to take a head coaching job, I want him to keep it, damn. And not just get like Woody Johnsoned his way out of there. But it also means that the kind of blackballing about the lawsuits with the Giants and Dolphins is probably falling away in terms of its importance, especially like the other New York team, you know, the Jets and Giants. Like having Brian Flores coaching games at MetLife Stadium while actively in a lawsuit with the Giants, it's interesting. But I digress. Let's talk about the Jets and who they're looking at right now. They have requested interviews with, this is from, I believe this is from the Jets official website. So the official requests have, and maybe there's other rumors that others are going to be added, but Joe Brady, the OC for the Bills, Flores, Aaron Glenn, DC for the Lions, not Ben Johnson on this list, by the way, which is interesting. But Brian Griese, who does QBs for the 49ers, that would be an interesting choice. Another QBs coach, Josh McCown for the Vikings. So put another one on the possible list of people leaving. And while we're on we'll come back to the Jets and all that too. But some other coaches, guys that have been head coaches before, Vance Joseph, Matt Nagy, Ron Rivera, a return of Rex Ryan, Arthur Smith, Steve Spagnuolo. I did still have Mike Vrabel on this list. So it's 16 for the Jets. My bad. But that's a lot of guys. And by the way, Jeff Ulbrich is one of their candidates, but that's when I say not all these guys are created equal, right? There are hot coordinator names like Bobby Slowick, Flores, Joe Brady, and then there's Darren Rizzi, who did interim head coach for the New Orleans Saints. Mike Loxley, a head coach for the Maryland Terrapins. Joe Witt Jr., who's currently DCing the Commanders. Like, those guys don't feel like quite as hot of names as Flores or Brady, or, you know, even Steve Spagnuolo is an interesting one, or like Ben Johnson, who's on other lists. So the pattern I see here for the Jets is a lot of former head coaches. Like, a lot of these guys were head coaches before, and so was Brian Flores. That seems important to them. They seem perfectly willing to have an offensive or defensive guy. I don't think that should be a huge consideration for your franchise. I think there's other things about all these guys that are important. But obviously, we'll see how it plays out. I don't know. I like Aaron Glenn, honestly, as a head coaching candidate as well. I don't think I like Josh McCown as a head coaching candidate. I don't know what kind of schematic input he has, but if you're hiring a quarterbacks coach, I guess you're doing it to like get a quarterback to be good, but I don't know who that quarterback is. Maybe he gets to pick him. But I mean, you're not drafting one of the top guys this year, and you're probably dealing with either Aaron Rodgers or the cap nightmare from Aaron Rodgers next year. Seems like it would be a weird hire, but that's that situation. They've also sniffed around some other Vikings assistants for other roles. We'll circle back to that. Let's move to Jacksonville, who has requested an interview with Flores, as well as Joe Brady. Liam Cohen, who designed the Tampa Bay offense and was sort of a McVay guy in the college ranks for a while. He worked with Will Levis a lot. Aaron Glenn, Patrick Graham, who was actually on the Vikings list when they hired Kevin O'Connell. Patrick Graham was one of the I think he actually made it pretty far in the process, if I recall. Ben Johnson is on that Jacksonville list. Todd Monken, Kellen Moore, Robert Saleh, and then again, Steve Spagnuolo. So these guys seem like they're going for the hot coordinator. And yeah, there's somebody like Robert Saleh who's been a head coach before, and you know, Spagnuolo has, and Brian Flores has, but the Jags seem like they're going for the hot coordinator. And Chicago, I don't know what they're doing, and I don't know if they have like a thing they're going for either. Not that you necessarily have to, but they have, of course, Thomas Brown on their list. Pete Carroll was an interesting name on their list. Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, so both the Lions coordinators on the last two lists. Mike Kafka, who's been a hot coordinator name before. Drew Petzing, who actually was in Minnesota for a hot second. Ron Rivera's on their list as well. David Shaw, who is not a head coach. He is a personnel executive with the Denver Broncos. So I don't know. There's that. Arthur Smith, the Dolphins DC Anthony Weaver, Mike McCarthy, who is, as of the loss of his Cowboys job, which, by the way, they haven't done any requests yet, so that's still a totally open-ended question. Joe Brady, Matt Campbell's got an NFL team sniffing around him as well. He's still at Iowa State. Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame, coaching in the national championship. Cliff Kingsbury, Todd Monken, and Adam Stenovich is the last one, the Packers OC. Just try to get somebody off the LaFleur tree. This seems like a total smattering to me. This seems like mud at the wall, see who like fits with your org. It doesn't seem like a team with a vision necessarily, or maybe it's a team that's looking to get their vision from their head coaching hire, which is valid, but I don't know. Listen to Locked On Bears for more speculation on that. I don't know where Brian Flores lands among all of these lists. I don't know if, Ben Johnson takes a job at all. I don't know if the Bears take Mike McCarthy. Boom, that crosses one off the list. So it's all things to watch. But there are other situations with the Jets to talk about, and another weirdly rumored one that we probably should mention as well. So that'll all be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. So go to FanDuel, sign up at FanDuel.com to join today, put $5 down on something you feel very confident about, even if the odds are really short, and you can get started with $300 in bonus bets. That is 60 to 1. 60 to 1 if you win that $5 bet. That is at FanDuel.com. The FanDuel app is also very easy to navigate and has all kinds of tools that you need if you're going to do live bets, same game parlays, or whatever kind of wacky nonsense y'all want to get into. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Moving onward here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, there are some interesting other situations that are worth monitoring. And while we will watch closely with the Jets, Jaguars, and Bears, possibly the Raiders, possibly the Cowboys, they're not ruled out yet. Other teams that are looking for head coaches have kind of like finalized their list, like the Saints or whatever, without Brian Flores on it. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But the Jets may not be done poaching the absolute heck out of the Vikings organization. For one, they've actually requested a GM interview with Ryan Grigson. Now, if you're a Jets fan listening to this and you want to know about Ryan Grigson, I implore you to read. So if you are, say, a Jets fan looking for information on Ryan Grigson, maybe even in the future if they do hire him or whatever, here's what you got to know about Ryan Grigson. If you're completely unfamiliar, Ryan Grigson is probably most famous for a catastrophic tenure as Colts GM and ruining Andrew Luck. There's a fantastic podcast series at The Athletic that it details the entire career arc of Andrew Luck and really paints Ryan Grigson as the bad guy, the guy that never got any offensive line help for Andrew Luck. He kept getting hit and sacked and hurt and ended up, retiring so early in his career. And I think the general consensus opinion is that Andrew Luck's retirement is Ryan Grigson's fault. I don't think this is entirely unfair. And I don't think Ryan Grigson thinks it's entirely unfair. So since that disaster, and he ends up getting fired from the Colts, he goes to the Browns for a year and then spends a couple years with the Seahawks, then goes back to the Browns. And when Kwesi joins the Vikings, he takes Ryan Grigson with him. Ryan Grigson was something of a mentor to a very young Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah in Cleveland. And I think that's kind of why he ended up in Minnesota. I think it was just a relationships thing. The two guys like each other, which, it's not necessarily the best hiring practice, but it's how NFL teams roll sometimes. But he has a very high up level input in the Minnesota Vikings. He is right in Kwesi's ear on draft day. He's sitting right next to him in the room. So I think he has a pretty executive and well-regarded opinion in Minnesota, but everything that I've heard and read, everything that's public at least, says that Ryan Grigson looks back on his time in Indianapolis with as much regret as you would want him to. And he understands, I think, the mistakes that he made. And I think that makes him unlikely to repeat them if he ends up in charge of your team. And in terms of what the Vikings would stand to lose, it's obviously hard to define. There's nowhere really where it says who does what in the Vikings front office, and they probably like it that way. But again, a thing to watch. But the Jets would not be done there because Josh McCown is also a head coach, possible head coach candidate. But let's say they hire Brian Flores. They could go hire Josh McCown as offensive coordinator. And guess what? They could also bring along someone like Grant Udinski. The assistant Vikings quarterbacks coach. However, that is not something that I know of that they've requested. I don't think that you even have OC requests yet until they have their head coach. That would be kind of crazy. But all those names could possibly be on their list. But Grant Udinski has gotten requested for an offensive coordinator interview for the Seattle Seahawks. There are 4 known candidates that we have for the Seahawks. 2 of them are in very weird spots. Those 2 are Clint Kubiak, who is currently Saints offensive coordinator. It'd be a lateral move, but with the Saints not having a head coach, nobody really knows what the future of Clint Kubiak is. And it's more common than not that a head coach will come in, clean out most of the staff, and hire his own guys. So I think Clint Kubiak is behaving as though he's about to get fired as soon as they hire the new guy and is allowed to take interview requests elsewhere because of that as a common courtesy. And Thomas Brown in a similar spot, interim head, Bears interim OC and then HC, and is now interviewing for the Seattle job. But the 2 position coaches that are in this are Hank Fraley, the Lions OL coach, who obviously the Lions offensive line is one of the star-studded units of the league, and you know the reputation precedes it. And then Grant Udinski. So if you're a Seahawks fan looking for information on Grant Udinski, you came to the right place. There is a great article from Ben Gessling from earlier in the year on his role with the Vikings. He is young. He is green. Probably for me, too green to be an offensive coordinator. But I think he will be hired away as an offensive coordinator someday. Like, I think he's just the kind of guy that's like one of those up and coming names that's got enough buzz around him that the second he's not so young that it's a deal breaker, somebody's going to pull the trigger and he's going to leave in that sense. And you know what? That's kind of the mark of like having a good team. If you have a good team, people want a piece. People will take from your staff. People take from the Rams staff, from the Ravens staff, from the Chiefs staff, from the Bills staff all the time. That's the mark of like a very good team. You will get guys taken from your staff. There is no way to not have guys taken from your staff outside of just being mediocre. Nobody wants that. So Udinski is something of a like regarded like wonderkind a little bit. He's the assistant QB's coach. He's credited with a few major moments in the last couple of years of the Vikings since he's been here. He is credited very heavily by Kevin O'Connell with getting Josh Dobbs up to speed quickly in that whole moment of Dobbs' sanity last year, and he was able to like play pretty well for a couple of games. Obviously, things fell apart on him when teams got a little bit of tape and realized that if you just show him a flash of color in his periphery, he'll run backwards, and that doesn't work. And you know, he had his meltdown, but in terms of just the logistic process of getting him ready, he gets a lot of credit. Udinski gets a lot of credit for that. And that's one impressive thing. And also Udinski's getting a lot of credit for spending a lot of time with JJ McCarthy. And JJ McCarthy's development has been very much affected by Udinski's presence. While Josh McCown is working with JJ McCarthy as well, Josh McCown's probably spent more time with Sam Darnold, and Udinski has his role on the sideline there too, and spent a lot of time talking to Sam Darnold on the sideline. You can see it in media that the Vikings have put out, like field access episodes and stuff. So he has a pretty active role in QB development. He has all kinds of interesting questions and thoughts for Kevin O'Connell all the time. He'll like stop into Kevin O'Connell's offense and be like, here's an interesting schematic idea. And O'Connell loves this guy for that. There's all kinds of other funny lore in it in the Ben Gessling piece. I'll link it in the show notes. Please yell at me if I forget to, but that's kind of what you're buying into with him. But for us, if we don't want to lose Grant Udinski, we kind of have to watch that Seattle OC search and see where that ends up. He's by far the least experienced guy on this list. And I don't know if Seattle's going to want to buy into that, but it's interesting that he's already getting people wanting to just talk to him. And then we have to watch how that Jets staff fills out. They're looking at a lot of people from Minnesota. There's one other thing. I don't want to talk about it. I don't even want to give it credence, but a lot of people have been asking, and I think people are curious and confused and worried, and I think it's cool to set the record straight. So we'll talk about this Kevin O'Connell trade thing next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Rocket Money. If you're like me, you will sign up for stuff and then forget about that. And then you'll just be like paying for stuff forever and not even realize it. That is what Rocket Money is for. It's a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions. But it doesn't just do that. It makes it very easy to track all those subscriptions down and get them canceled. But it also monitors your spending, brings all your information into one place, and helps you figure out where you could maybe cut back and hit your financial goals, track them, and help you manage your money all year round. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions. If you use all the app's premium features, you can save up to $740 a year. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Moving along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. I saved it till the end because I don't want to talk about it, but I have to, and so I'm stalling, but I've run out of time to stall. So I will give you the Associated Press facts as I understand them, but here's the headline that you probably have seen somewhere. If you listen to K-Fan, you heard Mike Florio talking to Paul Allen about it, is that teams are calling the Vikings about the possibility of a Kevin O'Connell trade. A lot of other stuff has been piled onto this, and as far as I understand, it's a lot of speculation and headlines without much of it being substantiated. So the dry, bare bones report came from Jay Glazer on a Fox, I think it was a pregame show right before the Lions game, that multiple teams had called with interest in trading for Kevin O'Connell. The report ended there. They didn't say whether or not the Vikings actually were receptive to that interest, whether or not they hung up on them right away. The local beat, Ben Gessling in particular, was pretty adamant that anybody who did call got nowhere. And I think Kevin Seifert even checked on it and said, yeah, we can confirm there were calls, but those calls went nowhere. I think it was something like that. I'm going off the dome there, but the local beat kind of threw water on it a little bit. But that didn't stop, the hacks of the world from going crazy with it. So that seems to be it, right? And Darren Wilson talks about this all the time, and I think he gets himself in trouble because he reports too many of these, but he'll talk about it all the time. The wildest phone calls happen. Anybody who has worked a lot in Vikings media, like sourced up, like journalist Vikings media, not me, right? I'm talking like the Judd Zolgads of the world that have been credentialed and in that building for regime after regime after regime, will tell you that the conversations that happen in those buildings would blow your mind if all of them were reported. They would melt your face because most teams have a no stone unturned policy about all these things. We will listen to any idea, no matter how ridiculous. And it doesn't mean that our confidence is wavering in any of that stuff. It's just irresponsible not to consider outside the box ideas. Outside the box ideas can be the reason you get some of the most successful things in the entire league. I mean, drafting Patrick Mahomes was an outside the box idea. Drafting Lamar Jackson was an outside the box idea. Drafting Josh Allen was an outside the box idea. Those were all like probably the most outside the box candidates of each of their respective draft classes. And look how it turned out. Or I guess you'd have to argue Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson with each other, which is fascinating, but I digress. Taking a phone call and then saying no and hanging up right away does not indicate a lack of confidence in Kevin O'Connell, right? To me, I just think that's, teams looking for a head coach openings and maybe even teams like Chicago or New York, the Jets who have requested like 4 different people from the Vikings staff, going, wow, we really like what's going on over there in Minnesota. Can we have it? No? okay, well then we'll just like request Brian Flores. Like, doesn't that just sound like that's the thing that happened? Paul Allen mused on this on KFan on I think it was on Wednesday, and kind of said, Jay Glazer is not the kind of guy that would go forward with something like without the source's blessing. And I think the more reputable reporters out there that, the people that, are big time national names, the Schefters, the Rappaports, typically will not go public with something unless they've been given the blessing to do so. Somebody wants that info out there if you're hearing it from them. I talk about this all the time as a way to kind of like parse out what is real and what is fake. And we are getting to rumor mill season. And it's a very important thing to understand. Okay, someone wanted me to hear that. Someone wanted that to be said on TV for the whole world to hear. Probably Kevin O'Connell's agent. But here's the reality of the situation, as reported by Gessling, by, I think Kramer at least corroborated it. If not, maybe it was just On Access Vikings also talking about it. Kevin Seifert also went out with that. They have all said, and the Wilfs told directly the Star Tribune and said, cite us. The Wilfs tell you that we're going to pick up extension conversations after the season ends. This was confirmed after the Vikings lost the playoff game this week. Ben Gessling confirmed this and said, yeah, the Wilfs say, all right, we're about to extend him. So just knowing that, really just take that information in. And what is that like? Be a reasonable person. What does that sound like? It sounds like everybody really likes Kevin O'Connell. Sounds like he's close to winning Coach of the Year. Maybe he will win Coach of the Year. And that everyone wants a piece of what the Vikings have going on, and that the Vikings are going to do their best to not let too many pieces out the door if they can help it. But with all of these, they can't do anything about it. And I think that that's good. I think upward mobility is a good thing that people should have access to, even if it means that my favorite team loses their quarterback's coach sometimes. So that's that. Now, I've seen other unsubstantiated things, mostly coming from Pro Football Talk, which I've complained about them a lot. In Florio in particular, especially considering how that particular publication handled Justin Jefferson over the offseason, when the whole local beat was adamant that he's going to get extended, they kept pushing trade rumors. And it was very clear that they were unsubstantiated, that they were grasping at straws, that there were reaches on reaches on reaches. But it was still enough to get aggregators to go crazy with it, to get headlines on every website, to get people talking about it on, talking head debate shows, and made the whole thing really annoying for people like me to cover, and annoying, I think, for fans to have to cut through all of this noise. I would like it for the noisemakers to stop making noise, and the noisemakers are making noise again. There was speculation about, Kevin O'Connell being upset about not having a contract extension. I feel like I need to mention that the standard move is when a coach is entering a contract year, you give him a contract extension. You don't give him a contract extension after a 9-8 season where he didn't make, or a 7-10 season where he didn't make the playoffs. That's not when you do a coaching extension with 2 years left on the deal. No, you do it after. Like the time to renegotiate is the offseason before his contract year. You don't want a coach coaching on a contract year. A coach coaching on a contract year, yeah, you could say maybe there's an issue there. And you could say that's a hot seat situation, right? But coaches get extensions before their contract, like a year before their contract is up. It's just what happens kind of most of the time. So any report that says that there's like consternation about it not going a different way is speculative in nature. And looking at the wording on any of these articles from Florio or anybody else who's doing this is always, well, he could be upset about this. Well, there could be. Well, they're blah, blah, blah. And it's very clear that they're not reporting anything. They're just kind of telling you a whole bunch of scary stuff that could be the case to hope that you screenshot it and put it on Twitter. It's all an engagement bait scam. It's a scam. Your time and effort is being scammed. And I hope that you learn who you can and can't listen to. Or at least you learned who you can and can't listen to after the Justin Jefferson thing, because they're trying to do it to you again. So all of that is to say, the likelihood of an actual Kevin O'Connell trade is pretty low. Even if you take all of this stuff in the most good faith way possible and as charitable as possible and say, okay, let's say there is some, there is a contract negotiation. Let's say there is a trade offer of 3 first-round picks on the board and that the Wilfs are maybe, and Kwesi are maybe considering it. Okay, let's say that's in their brain. I don't think that that's true, but let's, for the sake of argument, concede it. And let's say that Kevin O'Connell is being obstinate about money or whatever. Have you ever known the Wilfs to spare an expense? Like ever? If it's not like a salary cap, a player thing where there's like clear opportunity cost, that's a different deal. This would be like the Wilfs not upgrading the training facility. Like that's just not how they operate. And if you think the Wilfs are suddenly cheapskates, I don't know, man. You just haven't been paying attention. Like, you might be new here, which is fine. Hello, welcome to Locked On Vikings, where we're always trying to learn something new. That's okay. But the Wilfs spend. They'll spend on Kevin O'Connell. And more likely, I think his agent's just putting it out there to see if the price tag can come up a little bit, and it probably will. There's one other thing I want to mention. Paul Allen went on a big kind of tirade about how it's like very disrespectful of whoever put this out there to put this out there when they did, right before the biggest game of the season against the Lions. And while I understand that frustration, Paul Allen can be kind of a team mouthpiece about these things. Personally, I get it. Agents don't care about like competitively impacting a locker room. That's not their job to do. It's like getting mad at a defense lawyer for defending a criminal. Like, okay, but that's their job. And their job kind of has to be uncaring about all those things. His job is to make Kevin O'Connell money, and he probably did that. So I don't think he has anything to apologize for. I think the issue lies in the discretion of media members with what they decide to run with and when they decide to run with it and how double-checked it is. Again, this is not my world. Okay, I am talking from the peanut gallery here, and if you don't want to respect my opinion because of that, you're free to do so. That's fine. I accept that. But as a fan, I would like it if I heard from people who were a little bit more discretionary about what they told me, so I didn't have to keep looking at you and asking, hey, are you super wrong this time? If I have to ask, hey, are you like turbo wrong this time? That means you didn't do a good job of building my trust in you as a journalist. And there are people who have done a great job of that on this local beat that I cite all the time on this show. And kudos to them. But the reason I'm like incredibly disrespectful to Mike Florio is because he hasn't done enough to earn my trust. And I think he gets too much trust from people that he hasn't earned. And I would like to protect you from that because I care about you not getting the runaround and not getting jerked around by a dude that just wants your clicks. So I don't care about making him mad. I care about you having a better experience following the Vikings. So hopefully I can give you that. But either way, I think it's one big giant nothing burger and we won't be talking about it again. I certainly won't talk about it again unless something substantiated comes out. I certainly won't do like every weird Florio headline that he milks out of this until Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah are quietly extended in February and nobody talks about it again. We will talk tomorrow, maybe do some cap stuff. I don't know. We'll see what I feel like, but we are into that. Talk to y'all then. And as always, Skol.